And I just said, Lord, I don't know what to do with this next season of my life. So just take it. Just take it because I'm done. And I remember saying, I'm done. And it wasn't out of this desperate exasperation, but I'm like, I'm out of ideas, you know?
Yeah.
And that's when everything started to happen. And I didn't realize it until I was further down the road.
Welcome to the show. I am so happy that you are here. You are going to be so happy that you are here. I'm Kim Sorrelle. I'm a writer, I'm a speaker. I get to do all kinds of fun things in life, but my favorite thing to do is to meet people. And I get to meet some of the most incredible people that walk the face of this earth with us. And today is no exception to that. Ted started this incredible ministry where he is helping with human trafficking, which is such a big deal, a much bigger thing in our world than we realize. But beyond that, Ted is just an incredible human being. He's an author, he is a pilot, he's done some pretty fun things in life, and he had some challenges along the way. And I can't wait for you to meet him. Ted, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, Kim.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. So, Ted, I love to start with people's stories. So, I would love for you to start by telling us about 8-year-old Ted.
I'm sorry about what?
8-year-old Ted.
8-year-old Ted. I thought that's what I thought you said. I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. Wow. 8-year-old Ted. Okay. That's awesome. 8-year-old Ted. Um, Let me get back there for a second. Let me get back there for a second. Wow, this is cool. And I this is great. So 8-year-old Ted spent a lot of time in Ireland, actually. And my mother was Irish. She was from Cork, and we all my family was from Ireland. My dad was an only child, and he was raised in New York, and he didn't have any brothers and sisters, and his parents died when he was young. And but they immigrated to, my parents met in England, and then they came to the U.S. So we don't have any relatives in the United States. And and my dad was born in New York, but there were very few relatives on his side. We really only met one or two. But we had this big family in Ireland. So we would spend a lot of time in Ireland. And that was and still is such a magical place for me. And we had this little house in a town called Bandon, which is in between a place called Kinsale and Cork. And it was right on the Bandon River. And I would spend my summers there. And it was, even to this day, it's such a magical time. In fact, I was just back in Ireland in May, and I try to get back as much as possible. But it's it's always such a magical place. And it's so cool that you brought that up because I didn't expect that at all. But that is, yeah, that's a very, very special place for me.
Yeah. So, what was it like? So, you'd go like for the summer?
Yeah, we'd go for the summers. And so 8-year-old Ted, this was in a town called Kinsale, and they still had the fishing boats that were, manual. I mean, they were all oars. They were the old wooden fishing boats. And I would run down, and I haven't thought of this in years. I would run down out of the house in the morning and go down to the water. And right now, Kinsale is like Newport, Rhode Island. It's all built up. And it's beautiful. It's great. Wonderful restaurants. But back then, there was nothing there. And I would go into the fishermen every day. I'd jump into these fishing boats and they would row across the harbor in Kinsale. They'd string out their nets and I remember not being able to understand them. They were still speaking Gaelic at the time, and a little bit, but they were just like, and I would sit down and I'd help them row, and we'd put the nets out. And I mean, it would just seem to take all morning. And then they'd give me a salmon because they would come back with these giant fresh salmon. They'd give me a salmon, a big one too. And I'd run back up to the house, give it to my mom, and then go ride my bike.
That sounds like a fun way to spend the summer.
Yeah, yeah, it was really great. And we had and I had a lot of those summertime friends and those seasonal friends. And I did have one friend who actually we met when I was, when I was about 13, and we actually stayed in touch. Yeah, stayed in touch, and unfortunately he passed away a few years ago. But yeah, I've made some lifelong friends there, and my cousins are still over there.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. That's incredible. And Ireland is such a beautiful and, like you say, magical. I find it the same magical place to be. It's the people are so kind and genuinely kind, and it's beautiful. And I don't know, I love Ireland. So I can see.
And and it's cool because I have dual citizenship because I'm an Irish citizen and I have US citizenship. So I have always toyed, and it's interesting that we're getting into this because I've always toyed with moving back.
Hmm.
And this ministry was nowhere near my radar at all. In fact, I was really kind of I that was a huge option for me, was to go back to Ireland because I recently retired from the US government. I was at the Federal Aviation Administration, and I really didn't know what I was going to do with this season of my life. And I just love Ireland. I have more family there than I do here in the States. And it's interesting you brought that up because that was all right. That was on my radar. Maybe I'll just, I'll move back there, and and then this ministry just landed on me.
Yeah, it's interesting how those things happen. And
Yeah.
it's funny that you're in this transition time, right? Or you were in this transition time. Now you've got this goal, this thing that you're doing. But I think so often people our age, we get to a point where we're like, okay, now what? It's kind of the next chapter. Maybe we're done with this corporate thing we were doing, or this government thing we were doing, whatever
Yeah.
it is. And so what's next? And so for some people, it's the villages and it's golfing every day. For some people,
No.
it's whatever. But I think, it's not our grandparents' retirement. My grandfather retired from the state of Michigan when he was 55 years old. And then he plopped down in his orange chair, and there he sat for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a different time then. And I'm much older than 55. And I think there's still a lot here to give. Like, I'm not ready to just kind of put my feet up and call it quits.
And retirement is, I hate that word, number one. I just don't like that word. And I always say, when people I say I either, I took my retirement package and left out the back door of the FAA. Um, but this whole season really started back when I had just turned 50, and I was a musician in praise bands for years. I was a sailing instructor, and I taught on big boats, offshore coastal bareboat navigation, and I lived on my boat for like 10 years. I had a 37-foot Gulf Star that I loved, and boats were my life. And I was really kind of feeling that, all right, what am I going to do in this season? I had just turned 50, which was a long time ago. And I remember saying this prayer, and I didn't, I was in a big worship band up in Maryland in this big church. There was like 15 people there, and they're all kind of praying corporately. And I remember I broke away from that and I just said, Lord, I don't know what to do with this next season of my life. So just take it. Just take it because I'm done. And I remember saying, I'm done. And it wasn't out of this desperate exasperation, but I'm like, I'm out of ideas, you know?
Yeah.
And that's when everything started to happen. And I didn't realize it until I was further down the road. Um, I, yeah, I'm 62. I didn't start flying until I was 53. Um, and I had started flying when I was 16, 17, and then 20s, 30s, 40s, and I just never finished because flying is just, it takes all of you to do it. It takes two things, time and money. And I never had those two things at the same time, you know? But finally in my 50s, I had time and money at this, at the same time. And it wasn't long after I said that prayer where I said, Lord, take this next season. I don't know what to do. And then I literally felt God saying, finally. And that's when I started to want to do different things. I remember I woke up one morning. I had a condo in DC, and I had a nice Chesapeake house on the bay out in about 40 minutes south of Annapolis and it was a lovely house. And then a lot of times I just spend my time on the boat because I just love the boat. And I remember I was on the boat one day. I woke up, grabbed a cup of coffee, and I just said, I'm done. I'm done with this season. And I I drove over to the yacht brokerage and I said, put her up for sale. I'm done. And all my friends and my girlfriend at the time was just like, she was like, I can't, what are you doing? And I'm like, it's over. And sailing was my life. I was on racing teams in Annapolis and that's all I did. And it just went off like a switch. And I didn't even question at the time, but God was really starting to re-steer me, to this new season. And I had no idea what the new season was.
Wow. Wow. Isn't that incredible? I
Yeah.
mean, here you have this passion and you think it's going to be this lifelong passion, right? You had it for years. And for it to just all of a sudden, boom, that's it. You just know that it's over and
Yeah.
you're ready for the next and
Right.
for the next.
Yeah. And so, and then things started to change. I really felt God remove people from my life. God started to put new people in. And the church I was going to at the time, it's a great church, wonderful church, but I really wanted more. I really wanted more. And I started to, I just wanted to start clawing into the Word of God. I just wanted to get, I'm like, I know there's more here, but, it just wasn't there. Um, so I was really frustrated there. And then on a family vacation, I went down to the Outer Banks, and it was like 2 weeks during Christmas time, and the Outer Banks is just beautifully deserted and everything, and I just love it down there when no one's around. And a lot of the shops are closed and everything, and the beaches are deserted, and you got the whole place to yourself. And I was there with with my girlfriend and her kids at the time, and they were doing the kids' college applications, and then she was doing a Harvard application to apply for a Neiman Fellowship, which is a very prestigious fellowship. So they were really busy. And I was thinking, what am I going to do down here? I got 2 weeks, really nothing to do. So I went out to go shopping and stuff, and then I passed the sign for this flight school, and I just stopped, and I was like, I literally felt God saying, "Do you want your dream back?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I called the number right away. And I said, yeah. And I had actually I just started working at the FAA, at the Federal Aviation Administration, which was just a whole nother complete miracle in itself that I was there, but I didn't put the two together. And I called this flight school and I said, hey, I actually work at the FAA. What kind of programs do you have? And she said, why don't you just come in and go take a discovery flight with us? And I said, yeah, I've got about maybe 20, 30 hours. I've never finished over the last 20 years. And she said, well, come on in. I'd love to meet you and everything. So I went over there, and in 20 minutes, I'm in the left seat of a plane rolling down the runway. And then I remember that day that it was cool. It kind of smelled like a New York City taxi cab, the airplane, and diesel, I mean, the exhaust. And I was just like, oh, this is great, right? And the moment I took off, I'm like, I'm going to do this. This is. So I spent just about every day during that vacation flying. And I came back to the house we had rented, and I said, "Look, I'm going to get my pilot's license. That's it." And they all kind of looked at me like I was crazy, but they're like, "Okay, cool." And I started flying those 2 weeks, and then I was living in the DC area, and then for the next 5 months on the weekends, I drove back every weekend down to the Outer Banks, and I finished my license, my pilot certificate in about 4.5 months.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
And and then it was during my solo where I had this amazing experience. And then here I am, and just to kind of backtrack, so here I am, I'm in my early 50s. What am I going to do with this season of my life? I'm kind of out of ideas, and I handed it over to God, kind of almost unknowingly, right? So I was just like, Lord, take this next season of my life. And then I was just along for the ride. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was along sailing and the boat went out the window. That boat was gone. And I stopped hanging out with my friends. I was just, I was just totally on a different path and I didn't realize it. So on my solo, and I explained this in the book, and this was such a serious moment for me. So I'm really nervous. It's your solo, and I'm not 16. I'm in my 50s, and I'm rolling down the runway, and I'm like, ah, right. And the moment I took off, I was like, oh, I just felt such peace. And I climb up and did a crosswind turn, come up, and I climbed up to, I think it was like 1,500 feet. It wasn't high. And Kim, I felt the Holy Spirit come into that airplane. And it was the wildest thing I've ever experienced. I felt the Holy Spirit come in. It was December, but it got warm in the plane. It was so incredibly peaceful. And I was still in control of the aircraft. It wasn't like, oh, but I felt so incredibly peaceful. And then there was this hint, just this slightest hint of angelic music. I mean, just the slightest hint. You could barely hear it. And God came into that airplane. It just consumed the airplane like a cloud. And then all God said to me was, this next season of your life is going to be in aviation ministry. You're going to be flying around and helping people. And that's it. I was
Wow.
like, whoa, cool.
Yeah.
And I did my solo. I came back, landed. I didn't share that with anybody because I was still questioning. I was like, what just happened? And from then on, it was this progressive revelation. And I continued, I got my pilot's license, and I got my pilot's license with no glitches. I never failed a check ride, I never failed an exam. It was a lot of work. It really was. And it wasn't hard, it was just a lot of work. But then I'm at the FAA, and they were so incredibly supportive of me getting my pilot's license because, ironically, they didn't have a lot of pilots in the Directorate of Safety where I was working. Like, well, I thought that would be kind of odd. So,
Right.
over the next 4 months, everything that I was doing work related had something to do with my flying. Like, I was a multimedia producer and e-learning developer there. And as I was, I'd get a project. Oh, we have to do a training program for the controllers on Raleigh Durham Airport. Well, I had just flown into Raleigh Durham Airport, like 3 or 4 times, and it was things like that all the time. So I was familiar with the airports, and I knew it. And a lot of the people, weren't familiar with every airports, I mean, there were very few pilots in the ATO and the Directorate of Safety, and that was just, yeah, it was really crucial. It was really cool to do that. So they were very supportive, and I got my pilot certificate in May of 2017.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Yeah. That is really cool. It is such a great feeling when things align,
Yeah,
right? When you go,
yeah,
oh wow, good. I walked
yeah.
through this door and I was supposed to walk through this door. And then I'm
And
on this path,
right,
I'm
so
supposed to be on this path. Yeah.
and And then, so everything kind of went into alignment. I bought an airplane right after I did that because I knew God wanted me to do aviation ministry. So I didn't really know anything about aviation ministry. I had no idea. So I just like, well, I'm gonna need an airplane. So I bought this airplane, and when I took it for the inspection, the pre-buy inspection, I asked the mechanic, "Hey, what do you think?" And he goes, it's almost a piece of junk. I was like, perfect. That's what I want. So I still have the airplane. I've completely redone it. It's a nice airplane now, but I still have that airplane. And but anyway, so I went ahead and I got my instrument rating and I got my commercial rating over the next couple of years. And then I got what's called endorsement. So you have a high altitude endorsement, you have a complex endorsement, you have a retractable landing gear endorsement and all that. So and then I started flying gliders and I was just all in. And that was the same time as COVID. So, and I had all these upsets in my life. My father had died. We had to take care of that in our lives, my sister and I, and then my relationship, I hate that word breakup after 40. So it's just transitioning to something else. But that was changing as well. So I had all this stuff going on and work was going fantastic, but I was just so focused on this ministry. So I started contacting other aviation ministries in Florida and just kind of going over and there and visiting them and everything. And there was one Harvest Aviation, a great ministry down in Wauchula, Florida. And then I started to go on trips with them. So we did a trip to Belize. We did a lot of other aviation ministries, and it wasn't. I knew that that wasn't my home, but I knew it was in the right direction. And that's the one thing with when God tells you, God told Abraham, go. Abraham said, where? Just go. Moses has got his back up against the Red Sea and he's looking at the Egyptian army. And God says, what are you looking at me for? Keep moving. And Moses says, where? That way. The water's that way. Just keep on moving. And that's the crucial part is that if you have a God-given ministry or a God-given direction, it's rarely going to be focused at first, but just keep on moving. If you go off in the wrong path, you'll know it, and you're like, yeah, this doesn't feel right, but just keep on moving. Don't sit home and sit on the couch and wait for this great sign. So then so it really started to, the aviation ministry started to bubble over and everything. And then in 2018, I'm in a Bible study back up in Maryland, and a woman comes in to talk to our group unannounced. She was a surprise guest, and she came in to talk to our group about human trafficking in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area. And I've lived overseas. I've lived in the Dominican Republic. I've lived in Western Asia. I've lived in Europe, lived in Africa. So I know human trafficking goes on, but I never had an idea it was happening in the United States. I was just completely clueless on it. And as she started to talk, at first I'm like, she's making this up. I mean, I just didn't believe her, and I'm like, you're making this up. And then a few minutes into it, like 10 minutes, I'm like, oh no, you're telling the truth. I was just like, oh my gosh. And this hit me like a ton of bricks. So I, so it just, the way I describe it is that it landed in me like a wet bag of cement and just started to harden. So I couldn't, I mean, literally it was keeping me up at night. It was crazy. I'm like, why is this subject keeping me up at night? So I started doing some research and I talked to a friend and my friend said, yeah, I just read this book by Christine Kane called Undaunted. I'll send it over to you. So she sends me the book and it comes a few days later and I maybe got through the first 100 pages and I was just horrified. I was just like, oh my gosh. And I just was like, kind of, really want to get involved. So I started doing some research online and I came across a sermon by a guy by the name of Lee Dominique, who runs an organization called Trafficking Hope in Birmingham, Alabama. And I was really captivated by his testimony. And he started Trafficking Hope in the Well House. And he made a lot of money in fast food restaurants. And he really poured a ton of resources into these two organizations. And I loved his testimony because he was just a normal guy like me, except he had a lot more money. And and but I was like, I want to talk to him. So I called them that the next day. And I was just like, hey, I'm Ted Greenfield, and I got a crazy idea. Do you guys ever need private aircraft to transport survivors from one place to another? And I thought she dropped the phone. And she was like, oh my gosh, this is such an answer to prayer. You have no idea. And she told me for the next few minutes, she told me these horror stories about what actually happens when survivors are rescued. And the thing is they can't get them to safe houses because the safe houses need to be far away. They need to be like 1,200, 800, 1,000 miles away to get them out of the environment. But they have no way to get them there. And the trafficking survivors have no money, no resources, no friends, no ID. They have the clothes on their backs and they're out of ideas. Um, so she's like, this is such an answer to prayer. And she started telling me these stories that these survivors were just trapped and they couldn't get out. And then they're doing they're doing 16, 20-hour drives to get survivors to safety. And I'm like, oh my gosh, well, private aircraft could, cut that and, down to a quarter. I mean, so this call turned into a 45-minute prophetic prayer call where she just prophesied over me that I'd be running an organization with a fleet of aircraft rescuing hundreds, if not thousands, of trafficking survivors, and it would be a huge organization, and I'd be running it. And I was in a government building, in one of the FAA buildings at the time, and I'm in the hallway with my hand up, I'm just praying, I'm just, speaking in tongues, and I'm like, oh, and I don't care who's walking by me, because I really felt the Holy Spirit saying, this is it. I mean, it was just locked in me. And after I got off the call, I'm like, okay, I had no idea how this was going to happen. I had no idea how to make it happen. I had no resources to make it happen. I had nothing, but God gave me this thing. So I'm like, all right, keep on walking. And then from then, everything started to happen in 9-month periods of revelation. So 9 months from that phone call, I was calling other organizations and I was learning as much as I could about it. And I remember talking to a few organizations. There was two or three people that tried to do something like this, and it just couldn't work for one reason or another. And, they were telling me, oh, the aircraft insurance, it's just so incredibly expensive. It's just prohibitive, And then, oh, I had an airplane, but we really couldn't do it because the airplane was kind of small and it really couldn't carry 3 or 4 people. And then, oh my God, the expense is just, we just couldn't afford it anymore. And all the logical things, that would seem to be the barriers to it. So I was like, well, if this is what I'm going to do, Lord, just keep on walking toward it. Keep on moving. Don't get bummed out about it. Just, use it as an education. So about 9 months after that call, I'm in a meeting back up at the FAA, and it's one of these really boring safety meetings. There's like 40 people in there. We're talking about a safety issue, and I hear God tell me, invisible angels. And right away I knew he wanted me to buy the domain name. And I'm like, Lord, I'm a web developer, I'm an e-learning producer, I'm a multimedia, you know this. That domain name is going to be $3,500. And I started arguing with him right away. That domain name is going to be $3,500. And I don't have $3,500 right now. And I hear him say, buy the domain name invisibleangels.org right now. And I'm like, okay, fine, I will. And I politely closed my laptop. I, politely left the meeting and I'm walking down the hall back to my office. And I'm like, it's going to be $3,500. Just you watch. So you're going to either produce a miracle or whatever, but and I'm like, meh, 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 meh. And I get in there, I open my register.com account and I type in invisibleangels.org and I hit return and it pops up available $35.
Oh my word. Wow.
I'm
Yeah.
like, and I hit click purchase immediately. I'm like fumbling with my credit card to get it out, right? And I'm like, okay, okay. And the moment I hit purchase on that website, God told me two things. Speak life into this organization as if it is up and running and write a budget. Those two things. And I'm like, okay. And that's what I did for 9 months. I just spoke life into it. This is the vision for the organization. Hear ye, hearly, hark, the Lord has spoken to me. Right? And everybody thinks I'm crazy, but I'm just telling everybody about it, right? So 9 months of nothing. Um, and then I'm in I during COVID and COVID happened and everything, so I'm pretty much full time in Florida at that point, and I had this little condo down there, and I'm in this online Bible study, and I'm telling everybody in the Bible study about the vision for the organization, right? And there's a retired airline pilot in the group, and Bob, he's become a friend, and he said, "This sounds great. The perfect airplane for you is a Cessna P210. It's got a low fuel cost. It carries 6 passengers. It's turbocharged. It's pressurized. They're between 250 and $500,000. They're affordable. Um, that actually is the perfect plane for you, a Cessna Centurion P210." So later on that night, I got on tradeaplane.com, which is a popular website for used aircraft. And sure enough, I looked at a bunch of them for sale and they were the perfect aircraft. I was like, okay, well, Lord, all right, let's just kind of put that in my back pocket and move on. 9 months of nothing. again, another 9 month period of nothing. And I'm back up in DC at a meeting and or for meetings, and then I catch a Stephen Furtick sermon from Elevation Church, and the sermon was called "When God Gives You the Green Light." And I'm in my condo up in DC, and I'm listening to the sermon, and I just felt, all right, something's going to happen. And I'm literally looking under the cushions for the blessing. I'm walking around the apartment. I'm like, all right, I just felt all right. And later on that afternoon. I just had nothing to do. I went over and opened up tradeaplane.com, and the first ad that pops up is a Cessna Centurion P210, and all the ad said is, "I want to donate this plane to a nonprofit."
Wow.
And I'm like, I was just, I mean, that was the miracle of a lifetime.
Oh
So
my
I
God.
emailed the
Talk about a
guy,
green light. That
huh?
is talk about a green light. I
Yeah,
don't think it gets any greener.
yeah,
Like,
it does.
no.
Right. It doesn't get any greener. That's right. Yeah. So I emailed the guy and he calls me the next day and I'm high energy and everything and I just remember oh blah, 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 human trafficking blah, 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 God blah, blah, Jesus human trafficking Jesus trafficking not making any sense and he just goes son slow down I want you to have the airplane and I flew out to Kansas City a couple weeks later and he signed the plane over to me. And at that time now, all I had was a URL and this concept. I had no business plan, nothing start at all. Nothing started. And I remember getting off the phone with him and I told him, I said, I've got nothing. I don't have the 501c3 set up. I have nothing. He goes, son, get that all set up and call me when you're done. So I'm like, okay, I get on LegalZoom and I buy the business package, the nonprofit package. So I had everything set up in about 3 days. And then it was really funny. So I'm like, oh, I need a bank account. So I took $100 and opened a Bank of America business bank account, right? It just had $100 in it. No business cards, no website, nothing. And then I called him a couple days later and I put a rush package on the legal Zoom thing. So all the paperwork came in about 3, 4 days. I think it was like that. So I told him I had it. I emailed a bunch of stuff to him. And then I put a portfolio of me together just to prove that I'm not some lunatic that's going to go out and do something with his airplane. So I had like the last 5 or 10 years of my tax returns in there, my resume, my social security statements. I mean, I just it's me. So, um, and I flew out to Kansas City. He signed the plane over to me and he delivered the plane. And then I was going to fly the plane back. He said, no, I'll have my friend deliver the plane over. So his friend delivered the plane down to Florida and we did our first trip in December of 2021.
Wow. Wow.
And that's when, and so we're rocking and rolling. And then part two of the story happens. So a lot of times, we think that, okay, it's great. Everything's going to happen just like it happened for Ted and all these great miracles. And it's just, wow. And it's going to be really easy. So we're rocking and rolling. Everything's doing great. So that's 2021. We're operational for about a year, maybe a year and a couple of months. And we do this trip with Homeland Security. There was a very young child who was kidnapped and put into a child pornography ring by a parent, by the child's parent, which was just horrific. But we can get into the situation of human trafficking a little later. There's too much of that's all. It's just a horrible situation. So we got this call, and the short story is we had the child reunited with their mother the next day.
Mm.
And it
Wow.
was just great. Homeland Security is just saying, you guys, we couldn't have done this. And I said, I'm in the government. I know the government can't move that fast. It's easier to get $2 million from the government than it is to get $200. I mean, you can't get an airline ticket, but they'll buy you an airplane. It's just the way the government is. And so then someone at work at the FAA telling people about it, and they said, "Well, let's do a story on you. This is really cool." So they do an internal news story on look what our employees are doing, and they did this story on invisible angels. And it was a great story. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Maybe we'll get some donations, we'll get some support. Well, 2 or 3 days later, I get a phone call and I look on my phone and I'm looking at it and it says Washington, D.C. Flight Services Directorate Office. And I'm like, oh, you don't want to get a call from these people. It's like getting a call from the IRS, you know? And I was like, well, maybe they're calling to congratulate me, you know? Right? It was just,
Want to
well,
donate. They've got
yeah,
millions of dollars.
you got to think happy, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't. So here we are. We got this great ministry up and rolling, and everything's great. And then the guy on the other end of the phone says, all right, Mr. Greenfield, how are you doing these flights? Under what regulations? I said, we're doing it under Part 91 FAR, Part 91 charitable flights. And they said, no, actually, you're not. You're operating an illegal airline. And we're opening up a compliance action against you. They're charging me with operating an illegal airline. I'm looking at $1.4 million of fines. They can take away the plane. They can take away my pilot's license. They can revoke my pilot's license. Plus, where do I work? I work at the FAA. I mean, it's the worst possible scenario. And I'm just, and they said, okay, we're going to email you a hearing date, and they were very nice about it. But and I know how they work, so and they knew I worked there and everything. So it was a very pleasant conversation, but the outcome was the worst possible case.
How
So,
does that happen, by the way, Ted?
huh?
It's a very pleasant conversation, you say. So they're saying, oh, Ted, so great to know you. You're going to have to pay us 1.4 million dollars, and we're going to take your plane and your pilot's license, but have a great day.
Yeah,
How is that?
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were
Oh,
very, I mean, they're all aviation safety inspectors. So they're saying, well, look, pursuant to FAR Part 119, Part 91.162, you need to be a Part 135 carrier, and then you need to do this, you need to do this, and you haven't done any of that. So you're operating with, and their big thing was who is monitoring your safety compliance? Because that's why, and this is again looking back now, that's why they did this because they said, in fact, they said, look, we believe you're doing a wonderful thing. This is fantastic, but you have no safety oversight. And at the time I was like, but we're cool. We're doing it. It's awesome, right? But that was their main reason. And they weren't coming down just to do a big bad government thing. They said, we basically, without saying it, we want to be involved to make sure you guys are doing this, that the aircraft is fine, you're fine, and everything. So then, but they said, okay, they said possible, up to $1.4 million in fines. Look, you could lose your license. We could confiscate the aircraft, and you have to cease operations. Oh no, they didn't say that. They said it's up to you to cease operations. However, if you do continue, you could be incurring more penalties and everything. So and I was just horrified. I was just all freaked out. Okay, thank you. Got off the phone and I sat there and I was like, Lord, what's going on? And he said 3 words. Don't worry. Tell my story. Just tell my story. And I had that Philippians 4:7 piece. Okay. All right, I will. And I got up from my desk. I walked into my living room. I sat down on my couch and I just turned on the TV and just to process everything. And I remember Judge Judy was on, so she's arguing about arguing with somebody about $5, right? And a buddy of mine from the FAA calls, and he says, "Hey, what's going on?" We had a meeting that we had to talk about, and then I said, "I just got a compliance action opened against me for invisible angels." And he starts freaking out. What? How could you be so calm? Oh my gosh. How could you be so calm? How did this happen? And I said, God told me not to worry. He goes, what? Jesus would be freaking out if this happened to him. And in the aviation world, that would be true. And I said, God told me not to worry. And he just said, tell my story. So the short story of what happened, and it really was the next 18 months is that I had to get an attorney to go through the hearings with me. And the attorney, and all this is told in the book, the attorney was recommended to me by my friend Dave, who called. And the attorney said, well, you got to call Ed Page, and Ed Page is the premier aviation attorney in Florida. And I'm thinking, Ed, I know a guy named Ed who's a lawyer. And my friend Ed, I went flying with him. He has this really cool airplane. I knew he was a lawyer, but we never talked about work, and I made some videos for him and, we went to lunch and I just, met him. Turns out my friend Ed is Ed Page. I had known him.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Dave gets Ed on the phone. He goes, "Oh, Ted, you're in trouble." And I'm like, "Yeah, So he says, "Yeah, I'll help you out on here." And so we get on a call later on that night, and he goes, "Ted, tell me how all this started." And I said, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And he's like, "Yes." So I told him the whole story of the airplane. Plus, there's a million other little miracles, the funding, everything that happened there. I told him the whole story, and he's like, "This is amazing. This is great." Well, and I said, "Look, Ed, I'll tell you, how much is this going to cost? I have 5,000 bucks in my bank account." And he's like, "Well, I'm $895 an hour." And he said, "Well, could you get this done in about 4.5 hours?" You know? So he goes, "Don't worry, we'll work it out." So for the next few weeks, he prepped me, and it was a lot of work because I had to go to this hearing, and I really had to be well prepared for the hearing. And there was a ton of paperwork for every flight. I had to document every flight. I had to, get all the fuel receipts. I had to really, I mean, it was a mountain of paperwork that I prepared for this hearing. And I was very well prepared. We got the hearing date. We all showed up on the Zoom call. The very first question the aviation safety inspector asked me was, "Well, Ted, tell me, how did invisible angels get started?" And I leaned back. I'm like, "Do you guys believe in Jesus?" And there was all these government people on the phone, and Ed was right there, and they all just kind of stared at me. And I told them the entire story, every single little miracle, how this happened, from that, from when I was in the plane and I had the Holy Spirit experience. So, excuse me. So, so from when I was in the plane and had the Holy Spirit experience, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is amazing. You need to be a Part 135 direct air carrier to do this, but we're gonna give us a few weeks. We're gonna get back to you with our findings." And the call ended. My lawyer said, "Look, you're gonna hear from them about 9 months later." And I work there, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's about right." So we ended the call. I didn't expect to hear anything from 9 months for 9 months. And then my attorney said, "Look, you need to stop operating. You need to stop flying because if anything happens, you are opening up yourself for tremendous liability. You really are in a lot of trouble." So I was like, "Okay." And I called a few folks at the FAA, to try and get waivers, to try and let us operate. And they were like, "Look, you could go ahead and keep on operating, but if someone falls and slips going out of the airplane, you're just gonna be in a horrendous amount of trouble. It's just much easier to stop." And so we decided to stop operating. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, yeah, it was 3 weeks later, I get an email from these guys, and they said, "We've come to our decision. Here's your new hearing date." And it happened to be like, the next day or two. And I notified my lawyer, Ed, and Ed was like, "The FAA does nothing in 3 weeks." I'm like, "I know they don't answer an email in 3 weeks." He's like, "This is a miracle. And also, I think this is really bad. I think this is an early jury return, kind of your doom, prepare for the worst." And I didn't feel that at all. So the hearing gets underway, and they said, "Well, Mr. Greenfield, we realize this was a honest oversight on your part. We're dropping all the charges against you, and you need to be a Part 135 air carrier to do this." And I'm like, "Well, that takes 4 years and up to a $500,000. It just, you have to get invited to do something like that. It almost takes. It's easier to become president than to become a direct air carrier." And they kind of nodded their heads, and I think a little bit of wink, wink, and they said, "We're going to help you get there." And they did. They did. They were very, very helpful, and we became a direct air carrier 18 months later.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
really was. And then during that 18 months, it would take me 6 weeks to tell you all about the miracles, and that's why I wrote the book. And it was during that time, I woke up with the picture of the book in my head. It just didn't have my picture on it. It was just like this. And I woke up with that picture in my head so loud and so vivid. And then God said, "Write this." And I'm like, okay, I just did. So I wrote the book as this was happening. And then I finished the book last December. And so almost a year ago. And then God said, "Don't self-publish it. Start submitting to publishers." And I did. And then Anika Press picked it up, and here we are.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, absolutely incredible. It is amazing too to me, Ted, that it's like sometimes days can seem like forever, but years can pass by quickly. And when you're in the middle of something and you're waiting for that phone call, you're waiting for that approval, you're waiting to get the next okay, the next green light, you're in this kind of holding pattern, but yet still doing things, but wondering when the end is going to be. It can be so difficult when you don't know the end date, right?
So I was in my laying on my bed, sitting on my bed one night, feeling sorry for myself. I had just turned 60, and I was like, God, I'm gonna be 80 in 20 years. You gotta make things happen faster. Right?
Right.
Who hasn't been there?
Uh-huh.
And God told me this. He said, I tell time what to do.
Oh,
Oh my gosh. I was like, wow, I got so excited. I'm like, you do. You do tell time what to do.
yeah.
You tell time what to do. Well, let's go. And Stephen Furtick actually wrote a book, the sun stands still. And it's a story in Joshua. I mean, and I've seen that. I've seen months go by like they were hours, and I've seen hours go by like they were months. And um, we have to look at things, and this is very hard to do because even now I'm like, all right, we need this, we need, right now we need a bigger airplane. And I'm like, well, you gotta make that happen. And I'm gonna be 63 next year. Come on. Right? And it's like you tell time what to do. And it's all on God's time frame. But when it happens and when you allow that, not only you see the miracle, other people see the miracle. And that's what's really important because I'm out here now telling the invisible angel story. And, every time I have a conversation with you and podcasts and radio shows, I'm like, oh my gosh, when I was in it, I didn't see it. But
Right.
now it's this huge testimony, and everything is a testimony. We every year the Invisible Angels airplane has to go in for what's called a mandatory Part 135 FAA aircraft inspection, and every 100 hours of the aircraft's use, it has to go in for another inspection too. So that's why the FAA wants to be on top of it to make sure the airplane's perfect. And the plane had never been through an FAA Part 135 annual before, so everything pretty much had to be replaced because the rule of thumb is if you have an aircraft component that has never been inspected in the last 100 hours, it is automatically replaced. And that's just a safety concern. That's what you want. Um, and I remember we had $700 in the bank in the Invisible Angels bank account, and the bill was $55,000. And here I am a year and a half into this ministry, and I thought I'd be flying around and transporting human trafficking survivors and doing this one thing. And here I am, the plane's disassembled in a maintenance facility in pieces, and we've got a $55,000 bill. We got 700 bucks in the bank. God, how are you going to make this work? And I went into a tailspin, and it was really difficult. And one day I was driving to a dinner party, and I heard God say, "Don't worry, I'm making the plane perfect." And okay, but how are we going to pay for this?
Yeah,
Right?
right, 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 right.
You know?
That's great, God. You're making it perfect. But Nicholas, yeah.
And then at the same time, we needed an accountant because the person who did our accounting left. And so I'm at this dinner party, and I'm like, God, we need an accountant too. I just said we need an accountant because we have numbers and all that. I'm not the guy for that. And So I'm at this dinner party and I'm telling somebody about invisible angels, and everyone knows the ministry that that I have, and this new woman was there, and she said, "Wow, that's really cool." And I'm telling her about everything, and she goes, "Well, is there any way I can help? I mean, I'd love to volunteer." And I said, "What do you do?" And she goes, "I'm an accountant."
Well, just so happens that maybe we could use you. Yeah.
Well, then, and her name's Maria. She's amazing. I love Maria, and she's still with us. And it was during this time we had like $700 in the bank account, and we got this huge bill, and everything's just not moving. Everything's just iced over, right? And I called her up and I said, "Hey, let's go out to dinner. I'll take you out to dinner. We can talk, and you can listen to me complain." And she sits down and she was having none of my nonsense. And I don't know this person. She doesn't know me. So I sit down like, "Oh, what are we gonna do? I got all this money." And she goes, leans up to me and she goes, "The longer you freak out about this, the longer this is gonna take." And I'm like,
I like Maria. Now
"Oh
I like
yeah."
go with
And when she hit me like that, I was like, "You're right. You are right." And it wasn't a week later, the money started to come in when my mind just shifted. And I'm like, "Lord, this is your problem, not mine. I am sorry for complaining, you know, and repent, move on." And I got on the call and I got on the phone and I started making some fundraising calls, and that helped out a little bit. And that was, that's in the book too, because there's all these micro mini miracles that happened there, and God was just in the middle of everything. And that's where when God gave me the title for the book, God is in this fight, because he is in this fight. And not only did he build a ministry out of nothing, but he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And over the past few years, my perspective has changed. People around me say that, "Oh my gosh, you've grown so spiritual, you've grown so immensely in your spiritual maturity and your walk." And I don't ever want to say that because that sounds really arrogant, but yeah, my perspective has changed immensely. And just the plane went into the next annual inspection. I just dropped it off last week, actually, and I said to I said to the person at the maintenance shop, I'm like, "All right, so what are we looking at this year? Is it going to be another 50 grand?" And she goes, "No, the first one is always the worst." And I'm like, "Well, you should put that on your motto, on your business cards. The first inspection is always the worst." And I'm like, God's got it. And I don't think they're believers, but they hear enough about Jesus from me every time I come in there. And so I drop the plane off, everything's great, and they send you an email of the mandatory items in your aircraft that are timed out that have to be done. And the first I got, there were only three, which was great, and the first two were no big deal. And the third one was they have to replace all the fuse hoses and all the fuel lines in the aircraft because they're timed out. They have to be replaced after a certain number of years. That's a huge job. And you've got fuel tanks, it's quite complicated. And I just felt God's got it. No big deal. You know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's just like, I'm not, no, we're not going to have another, the longer you freak out, the longer this is going to take conversation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And what a wonderful piece that is in knowing that God's got it
Yeah.
and that he's proved it over and over again. It's so funny to me, Ted. It's like you can get hit over the head with something, right? Like I feel sometimes like God has got to hit me over the head. Like I think I know and I'm going a certain direction and this is the way and this is going to be great and whatever. And then the red light comes on and you're like, why would that be? And whatever. And then God hits me over the head with something. And so it's like for you, you're going and you're freaking out. But then this little while later, in the scheme of things, it wasn't that much longer later
Yeah.
that you're going, no big deal. Whatever it costs, whatever it is, that God has control.
Yeah.
What a place to be. What a wonderful place to be that
Yeah.
peaceful place.
And now so now we're getting all these requests to like go from Naples to Boston, from Eau Claire, Wisconsin to Homer, Alaska. Got a lot of requests to go out west. And we really can't do that in the plane that we have right now. We only have really an 800 to 1,000 mile range. And it's a six passenger plane, but at the end of the day, you don't really want to put somebody in there for 4 hours. It's longer than 4 hours is a pretty uncomfortable, you don't want to sit in a commercial jet for 4 hours.
Right.
And so we really need something that, could do that trip from Florida to New York in 2.5 hours. And we really need a much more robust airplane, a TBM 700 or a Pilatus PC-12, and they're about $4 million. And I said, Lord, this is what we need. And all we need is another zero on the plane that was previously given to us.
Mhm.
And and uh and God knows what we need.
Mhm.
And so that's really and I do have peace about it because he'll take care of it. It's all I'm doing in this ministry is just managing and getting the bills paid on time and drive. I'm not driving it. I'm there's we're talking about putting a new vision statement together for 2025 and beyond. And I said to one of our board members, I said we really got to pray about this for a couple of months and individually, and then come together. And what's God telling you? What's God telling me? And they're going to line up, but we really got to put that vision statement there because uh, everything has to be done in prayer, and prayer is the lifeblood of our group here. So we're really kind of looking forward to it. And also we have the opportunity to start a private charter airline here as well. Because since we're a Part 135 carrier, we really can't do that in our little plane. We can do little trips around Florida and stuff, but if we have a larger plane, then we could actually start a charter airline and be competitive with NetJets and Wheels Up and the other private charter companies. And we're a nonprofit, so everything every trip that you buy from us is going to raise money for the actual human trafficking rescue and other flights. We also provide transportation for law enforcement because law enforcement can't get around like you think they can. They just can't, hey, I need the helicopter, bring the chopper around. They can't do that. And then we're bringing a survivor to a victim impact statement from Alabama to South Carolina. She has to get there to do a victim impact statement for a trafficker's sentencing. That's very, very important. And then there's another survivor, Holly Harris. She wrote an amazing book called Relentless Survivor, and she had to give a book talk up in Merritt Island, and she was in Sarasota. And she said, "Hey, is there any way you can fly us there? It's a 3.5 hour drive and a 3.5 hour drive back." And I'm like, "Absolutely. It's a 25-minute flight." So we went and we gave her a ride to the book talk, and she did a wonderful job. And I said on the way home, I said, "Anywhere in Florida, the Carolinas, Georgia, you need to give a talk, we'll fly you there for free." And we want to provide that transportation as well as we did a couple of Christmas flights last Christmas, got some people home to see their families, and then we just about 3 weeks ago we just took a survivor, and she was in a safe house. She's halfway through her program. They're usually about 2-year programs, and she just wanted to go see her family and her kids for a week. And she called us. Absolutely, absolutely. So flew up, pick her up, took her down, and then took her back to where she was going. And we want to be able to provide that because air transportation is the missing link, and many survivors don't have identification, and traveling's a hassle. Getting into an airport, traveling, I had to go from Tampa to Charlotte, and I got online and it was $762 round trip. And I'm
Oh,
like, I could fly my own plane there for cheaper
yeah.
and, easier. So I flew myself there. A lot of times I'll fly commercial just because it's more convenient. And cheaper if you're flying one person. But, so air travel is very expensive. And if you're not used to it, I've flown quite a lot and I'm a pilot and, so I get the whole airport. But if you're not used to it, going through an airport, going through TSA and what you
Right.
can bring
Oh,
with you, what you can't. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and especially if you've been living in this trauma
Yeah.
and then you're being rescued from it, you're being taken out of it. I can't imagine all the things that
Right.
an airport would do to you. Like
Yeah.
there'd be triggers all over the place. Like
Right.
it'd be horrible
Right.
to have to go that
Yeah.
way. So yeah, because human trafficking is for real. It's not.
So I found out.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
what's really alarming is that in and statistics are hard to get, but a large number of our of our the survivors that we've given transportation to were trafficked by family members, and
Mm,
up to 70% sometimes uh, people are trafficked by someone that they know.
mm,
And it's not like I had a I had a long conversation with a survivor just last week. She's long since, been been long out of a safe house. She's successful. She's thriving, and I think, she's probably about 5 or 6 years, out of the life, and she's doing wonderful. She's married. She has a child, and she's really thriving and just doing great. And she's working on writing a book. And she called, and we were talking, and we got on the subject of Jeffrey Epstein, and she said, the Epstein survivors aren't us. The Epstein survivors are they're very few and far between. And these survivors all have jobs. They all have resources. They all come from that, from a higher upper middle class. Um, you know, and and not saying that their trauma is any less. Okay, so I don't ever want to, I diminish what their trauma was, because it's just the same as other people's. But we want to make sure that people don't see the Jeffrey Epstein survivors and say, "Oh, that's what it's like," because the average trafficking survivor is, let's say, it's between 8 and 48 years old. Poverty and drug abuse are the underlying, those common things, those common traits, and they don't have resources. They don't have IDs. They get into this life and they can't get out. They don't know how to get out. And the our very first trafficking survivor we gave transportation to, she tried to leave with four other girls, and the other four were murdered.
mm,
I mean, just and so it's much worse than what you see on TV. So it's not only the Jeffrey Epstein thing, although that is equally as horrible and equally as traumatic. And but that's the stuff that's in the news. What the trafficking survivors we deal with aren't in the news. We've had child protective service workers traffic foster care kids,
mm,
and the situation is horrible. And law enforcement is just getting ramped up now, where they're becoming aware and they're properly resourced for it. Um, we just helped the FBI out on a case 2 weeks ago, where three churches were raided by the by the FBI. One in Michigan, one in Tampa, and one in, I think it was in the Dallas and Texas area. And it was a church, it wasn't really a church, but they called themselves the Kingdom of God, and they had a huge labor trafficking and human trafficking operation and money laundering operation going on there. And the FBI put them out, but they couldn't get the survivors' families down from to Tampa, to take care of this one survivor, and they just couldn't do it. They're not resourced for that, so they called us, and we were able to, and they had IDs, so we were able to buy the airline tickets and manage all that. And they just said, "Look, here's the date. Here's when and where we need them." We said we got it, and then we also bought this one survivor's medication, because he ran out of his medication. He didn't have any more, and the FBI they were wonderful caring for these people, but they didn't have that, that the small amount of cash to get the medication. So we took care of that. And then also we have partnerships with Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Nautica, Brooks Brothers, and Lucky Brand. So every 6 weeks, every month or so, we get donations of brand new returned items, and we turn around and every survivor that we transport, we have a backpack that we give them with a journal, a Bible, and a brand new clothes in their size, just something that's theirs and nice. And then we also fly deliver the clothes to rescue locations and rescue safe houses and stuff. So they have all brand new Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein stuff, and it's just so every month and a half we bag stuff up, put it in the airplane, and it's usually about maybe 150, 200 pounds of brand new clothes, and fold it up, put it in plastic bags because it's easier to pack that way. And we fly to Merritt Island to Life Recaptured, or we drop a load off at Sail of Freedom, or with Free Indeed up in Albany, Georgia, and that's another ministry that we have inside of Invisible Angels.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh, I love it all. You know, what's amazing is I think a lot of times people don't think about the impact that aviation has on so many people's programs. I've done a lot of work in Haiti and Dominican Republic and other places and worked with Agape some and
Yeah,
whatever. And what an incredible blessing when you're trying to get anything from one place to another, or you're trying to rescue people somewhere that need to be brought someplace else. There's no other way to do it.
yeah,
It's not like you can go by foot, or it's not like there's a car that's just going to pick you up and take you somewhere. I mean, it's impossible for people.
right.
And then you come along, ministries like yours and especially yours come along, and you are the missing gap. That is the thing, the link that is missing, that can bring people out of where they are and into where they can be. And so, man, I just appreciate what you're doing so much. It's incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for what you're doing. It's and human trafficking is for real. I mean, anybody who doesn't understand it or wonders how big it is or whatever, it is much larger than I think anybody imagines it to be. And you hear about it sometimes. You'll hear like the Super Bowl's in town, so everybody be on the
Hmm.
lookout because that's a real prime time for things to happen. And
Boat shows, any major event. There's that, it's demonic evil. I mean, there's always that element that is that predatory element. And um, awareness is the biggest thing, so now if I'm out and about, if I'm in Chicago, or if I'm in back in DC or wherever, and if I see somebody that's out of place, whether they're 6 or 16 or 60, it's just that, hey, I remember I saw a young girl. It was 11:30 on a Tuesday, and she's walking down the street, and I'm like, she should be in school. What's she doing? What's going on? And she wasn't dressed right. She had flip-flops and, a tank top and cut off shorts. I'm like, what's going on there? And it's just little things like that. And they're the predators out there are horrendous, and they're horrific.
so, yeah, so you bring up a really good point that we should all kind of be looking out, right? I mean, you see the signs sometimes in airport bathrooms or
Yeah.
whatever, that there's a couple things to look for, like if people don't make eye contact, or somebody else won't let them speak or whatever. What do you suggest to people? Like, how do you
Well, if
rate
you
up?
see something, say something. I mean, there's nothing wrong with making a call to 911 and talking with the 911 operating and say, hey, something doesn't look right. There's, you know, there is a 58-year-old man who is hovering over a young lady getting her nails done in a nail salon. And he's obviously not her father, and she looks kind of scared, and he's just fat and creepy.
Mhm.
And that's the phone call you want to make,
Yeah.
because they will send somebody down and just say, hey, what's going on? How you doing today? What's happening? And officers, you know, um, officers are police officers are very well versed, and they know when something is wrong. They know instantly. This is their job. That's what they do. Don't ever go and confront them yourself, because that's just, you don't know who you're dealing with. Some of these people are highly dangerous. We're not a law enforcement operation. We don't carry guns. We're not going to be armed. um, we provide transportation from A to B. We work with law enforcement and rescue organizations. So we have law enforcement at our beck and call, and they have been wonderful. We did a trip, I think it was last November, or was it January? I think it was around then. We had to pick up someone in another city, and it wasn't a good scenario. I mean, right away I said, "This isn't good. We need law enforcement's help." And we called the state's attorney's office, and they met us at the airport. They took care of everything. They were armed. That's their business. I said, I'm going to stay here with the airplane. You guys go along and do the thing. I'm not the guy who wanting a gunfight or anything. I mean, I'm just that not my specialty, but I'll have the airplane ready to go. And sure enough, and there was no problems. And they were back. They went and got her in, I think it was like 22 minutes. And they escorted her into the airplane, and they stayed there just to make sure everything was fine as we took off. And we were at a big airport. We weren't at a major, at a major international airport, but we were, it was a good size airport. So that's the thing. If you see something, say something, and then awareness is the big key. Is start looking online, start reading about it, and then talk with your children, because I've been speaking to homeschool groups, and I said to one group of 16, 17-year-olds, I said, if you're on an online chat or you're on your video game chat or whatever, and you're speaking to Jessica online, you don't know who Jessica is, chances are Jessica is probably a 55-year-old man in his underwear in a hotel room somewhere.
Mm,
I mean, you are put here as sheep among wolves. You have to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves.
mm,
And it's a dangerous world. It is a
mhm,
dangerous world. Don't let your guard down for a second. Don't be paranoid. And it's a hard thing to do, but um, know who's out there and I've heard stories of people who go to parties, and they don't come, they meet the wrong guy at a party. Oh, let's go here, let's go there. And the next thing you know, they wind up in a hotel in another city. And that doesn't happen, that's not the main way it happens, but it does happen.
mhm. Right.
So it's a very dangerous thing. And then support agencies, like people say, hey, how can we help Invisible Angels? Well, we have legal needs, we have administrative needs, but the biggest need we have is we have a $360,000 budget every year. It comes in $25 at a time. So if it's $5, if it's $25, or if it's anything, just don't ever think that, oh, someone else is going to give. It doesn't work like that. It's that it comes in $25 at a time, and financial support is the biggest thing we'll always need. When I had that very first conversation with the director of Trafficking Hope, the first thing that she said to me, she said, from here on out, the only thing you're going to be doing is raising money. And I thought, oh, that'll be easy. That'll no problem. I'm a bit of a salesman anyway, but oh my gosh, that's all I'm doing. That is
Yeah.
all I'm doing is raising money, because and when we upgrade our aircraft to that $4 million airplane, then we're going to be looking at you'll be looking at 800 to $1,000 an hour in fuel costs,
Yeah.
and the insurance. I mean, right now our insurance is like $20,000 a year. The insurance is going to be, probably close to 35 or $40,000 a year. But it's needed. What's a human life worth? And it doesn't matter. Um, if 3,000 people give $10, that's $30,000.
Mhm. Yeah,
It
exactly.
doesn't, that's not a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So where can people give?
So they can go to invisibleangels.org right at the donate tab. And everything could be reached on our website. There's a lot of videos that you can have a look at, some videos of our survivors, some videos of our rescue stories, and there's a video on there. What does a human trafficking flight look like? A rescue flight look like? Also, you can go to for the book. You can go to godisinThisfight.com. And the book is available on Amazon, and from the publisher Tanika Press. And there's the audio book version is available as well as Apple. So you can just Google God is in this fight, and it'll come on and pick it up. And all sales proceeds of the book go to Invisible Angels.
Mm,
And that was one thing when, after I signed the publishing contract, God said, now give all the royalties go directly to Invisible Angels. And I'm like, yep, that's that's no problem, you know.
yeah.
So
Oh,
and just buying the book at $25, or I think it's like $17. Um, you know, again, if 1,000 people buy the book, that's $17,000. That's, so it's, you may not think $10 will help, but if 1,000 people do it, it will.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Ted, this has been so great. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for what you're doing. It's
Thank you.
absolutely incredible. I appreciate it so much. I know that there are a whole lot of people that appreciate what you do. And everybody out there, invisibleangels.org. It's easy to remember. Just go there, donate, do it monthly. Like I'm sure you can do a reoccurring
Yeah.
donation if you want to. So if it's 25 bucks a month, 50 bucks a month, 100 bucks a month, I mean, people spend more than that on Starbucks. So,
I know.
drink
I
your coffee at home.
know.
Drink your coffee at home. Take that money and give it to this cause, because you're going to be saving lives. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
it's down to, which is just absolutely incredible. Ted, thank you again. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for what you do. And buy the book, everybody. Buy the book. And don't just buy one, buy them for friends. I don't know about you. I love getting a book in the mail. Think about people that you know. Amazon makes it so easy. You don't have to drive to the bookstore, pick up the book, get it in the mail. All that, they'll do it all for you. All you got to do is click, buy it for people that you know would love to hear the story, and support this incredible ministry, Invisible Angels. I appreciate it so much. And thank you all for joining us today. And until we see each other again, I just pray that you keep your heart open and you live your love loud.